Before we can even start part 3 and subsequently episode 5, I need to make a few corrections regarding certain plot elements I said would be mentioned in certain episodes. I was under the assumption that episode 6 was conducive to the family gathering episode, but in fact, episode 5 is that, and episode 6 is more conducive to Wednesday getting her licks. So, spatial presence of certain characters in mind, everything I said regarding this episode 6 prior is actually pertinent to 5. So, now you know that, episode 5's main school flavor is that the parents of the respective students are coming back for a reunion of sorts, which also allots the resurgence of Gomez's criminal records once they acquired from Tyler back in episode 1 their importance. Instead of a vision, Wednesday reminisces what likely happened during the pivotal moment where Gomez killed somebody back in 1990. I should also mention again that in spite of your preconceived notions of this show taking place in the 80s, that Wednesday specifically mentions this murder taking place 32 years ago, pitting the Wednesday show right at 2022, respectively. Anyhow, a out-of-context flashback plays where a younger Weems is witness to a dead body falling off some scaffolding with Gomez precariously standing above with bloody rapier in hand. Quick spoiler warning for what will comprise this flashback. Get prepared for this flashback to be mentioned in completely different contexts several times in this episode, almost as bad as the flashback regarding the fate of the protagonist's father in Detective Pikachu. In the flashback, young Weems testifies what she saw and blames Morticia for the incident as the two men were presumably fighting over her. With the way Weems jeers at the young Walker, it's safe to say that Weems is likely embellishing this on account of the previously established jealousy she has for Morticia. As young Gomez is stuffed into the 5-0, we jump back into the present with Gomez riding shotgun for the parents' weekend. As I established, that was going to be the school flavor of this episode. I should also mention that episode 5 is the last time a school event will be a central piece, as episodes 6, 7, and 8 are all beset on unraveling the connections between the monster killings, Crackstone, and the prophecy regarding Wednesday. As they arrive, Gomez and Morticia do the usual sizing up each other as they're prone to do, as we cut to Weems yet again giving the formal announcement of yet another school event. Now, of course, you'll say, well, of course she would, she's the principal after all. But I say that's only a slight pass, as I've countless grieved at the lack of any school body beyond Weems or Thornhill present. Weems also mentions the circumstance regarding Eugene's fate, stating that he managed to survive his scrape with the monster while being currently hospitalized. Now, given that Weems has already once covered up a student's fate, I was first believing that Weems might have also exaggerated the nature of Eugene to cover him up as well, but nope, he literally is on the mend, as she states, and maybe figured that with Thornhill and Wednesday's testimony as such would be too hard for her to cover up. Enid asks Wednesday if she's visited Eugene, and interestingly, Wednesday says she hasn't on account of guilt for why Eugene is in the state he's in. Yeah, and there's a certain other entity that should also take blame for their moxie on you, wanting to prioritize going to a dance above all, but regardless, Enid tries to reassure Wednesday by stating that the monster hasn't attacked in the past week. Now, up to this point, we've assumed that all of these school events have been happening day by day, or at least only with a few days between them, but the sudden gap of time between what happened in episode 4 to 5 is quite jarring, and there very may well be a narrative reason as to why that jump was made. Wednesday is reunited with the Addams as well as being acquainted with Enid's parents, who according to Enid are quite conceited in her as a result of her inability to wolf out. But considering even the fucking werewolves we've had seen haven't either, makes this a moot point of concern. Regardless, they deal with their better halves. As per Wednesday's vernacular, she immediately jumps down the Addams' throat regarding their intentions using Thing as a spy for them, disregarding how unruly she's been up to this point to wring the Addams' hand into this act of desperation. It's just more of the trying to sound smart attitude that is tantamount to this new variation of Wednesday. At least there is some levity in their exchange as, contrary to how they were acting as though normal people in episode 1, actually are quite relieved to find Wednesday at the tail end of an attempted murder, as would be macabre and customary to them. Hard cut to Enid as she exposited to Wednesday. Her mother is quite judgmental to her, while her father is this silent arbiter type who only has a grin to give to her. Basically, this dynamic between Enid and her parents don't do well to dwell on Enid as a character, as up to this point she's been inoffensive and inconsequential to an eye. That will be a lot of the other characters' dynamic with their parents. Like with Bianca and Xavier, who the latter apologizes for his attitude towards her at the dance while acknowledging the absence of his father, yet again at such an event. Remember when I said that what Ajax said about Xavier's father being questionable wouldn't amount to anything? This is, quite literally, the only other time Xavier's father is mentioned in any capacity. And frankly, I think it would have helped contextualize his relationship and Xavier as a character if we did see his father, but any further speculation on Xavier would put to rest the red herring of a suspect the show desperately wants him to be. Bianca can relate to this long-distance relationship as her mother hasn't appeared since Bianca started in Nevermore. A bit curious given I'm assuming that boarding schools don't attend students year-round or even year by year, meaning that at some point they would go back to their respective homes if their parents aren't fronting the bills, but that's just another logistical scap in the function of Nevermore as a school I can put in my feather cap. Inevitably, Bianca's mother does make a surprise appearance to the bewilderment of both Bianca and Xavier, who the latter steps off to give the two their moment. What moment I mean will be saved a bit later. We cut to the principal's office where Morticia peruses Weems' old yearbook in awe, giving Wednesday a piece of evidence regarding Weems' culpability by way of a talent show where Weems impersonated Julie Garland. Yes, that's right folks, Wednesday is so smart that now for the second fucking time, another character gives her information secondhand to lead her along for the ride. But don't worry, it will get really bad regarding episode 7, and yes, I do mean episode 7 this time. Anyhow, Morticia does eventually notice that her page was ripped out, but doesn't inquire further as to why, in spite of the fact that it was Weems' yearbook she was poking around in. Now, I should mention why the Addams are in Weems' office in the first place, as Weems addresses the rocky nature of wrangling Wednesday regarding the murder accusation of Rowan and the statue's sabotage on Outreach Day. Through this, Weems suggests a family session that Kimbot will corral to stabilize this unruly Wednesday. In cuts to Jericho again as the Addams drive on to attend said family session. As they pass on by, Sheriff Galpin is still on the hunt for the monster, wanting his folks to investigate the cave. Now, of course, why the fuck didn't Galpin think to scope out this cave earlier, considering these strings of murders have happened a few weeks before Wednesday showed up, is beyond me, as though the existence of this cave was literally invented for episode 4's sake only. As Galpin is on the phone, he does spot the Addamses exiting out of their car to attend their session because, of course, the only character who has it out for the Addams, beyond Weems I guess, would notice, for as I stated, the weather vane is the goddamn public square. Tyler also takes notice of what his father's witnessing, posing some more dialogue between them regarding their strained relationship. Not enough, however, as Galpin gets another phone call stating that Reggie Anwar just killed himself. That I'm absolutely sure he did so with 2 bullet holes to the back of his head somehow, but the significance of why or how Anwar's death is ruled as a suicide will be more important later, and come with it more of the extreme luck and cleverness of a character yet established to have those qualities. In cues the family session, and with it more of these really uncomfortable shots fixated on the actors' faces as though judging me. Anyhow, Kimbot starts by asking how it's been since Wednesday's absence, with Pugsley saying that he missed her frequent tortures of him, and the parents having more free time to do some kinky shit. Yes, these are both jokes at the expense of the characters, and not actual humor regarding their morbid nature. Wednesday doesn't split hairs and brings about the criminal record regarding Gomez and his murder of one Garrett Gates. Keep that name in note, as it will become suddenly important later regarding the Gates' family history. Anyhow, Morticia butts in to say that the charges were dropped, and Wednesday isn't convinced on Galpin's own belief that Gomez is a murderer, which is a interesting choice for Wednesday to take Galpin's account of things, given he's been both opposed to her and the Addams thus far. Morticia has had it with Wednesday's brashness and ends the session abruptly while confronting Wednesday on the matter, insisting that Gomez is innocent of any wrongdoing. Now, another jarring choice to give Wednesday is that she suddenly cares about the idea that Gomez killed someone, when throughout she's proven to not only had killed people, but takes pleasure in trying to, regardless. Of course, you could say she's more upset about being lied to more so than the principle of it, but the problem is, the Addams haven't lied about anything. Withheld information? Sure, but a lie would require them to claim, as Morticia did, that Gomez didn't murder anyone. And as far as Wednesday knew, she didn't even know there was a record out on Gomez's behalf. So now, Wednesday suddenly grows a conscience to find it a betrayal of their trust, when Wednesday up to this point hasn't given a shit about what her parents think of her, thinks lowly of them, and absolutely wants nothing to do with them. It doesn't add up, and that's a consequence of the writers trying to force this conflict between Wednesday and primarily her mother in this fashion. Wednesday shouldn't really care about why they withheld information and should be, as they've established her, morbidly curious if Gomez did kill someone in cold blood or in self-defense, but here the writers have reflexively changed their minds in order to facilitate more drama between the Addams at the duress of the other drama they already established. Back at the weather vane, like I said, public square, Bianca and her mother have a chit-chat about wanting Bianca reunited with her mother's supposed community project called Morning Song. We also established that Bianca has so far removed herself from her mother that she changed her name and livelihood, somehow doing so at the age she was within the confines of a boarding school, no less. Bianca wants nothing to do with her mother's new lease on life before she properly confronts her with why she really showed up. Her mother's siren powers are drying up, and the project is on road's end, while giving Bianca an ultimatum of threatening to pipe up about how Bianca asserted herself into Nevermore in the first place if she doesn't. All of this sudden intrigue into this character will never be brought up again, and is likely a Season 2 plot beat when and if that Season 2 will see the light of day, which I find a real cheap cop-out to do so if you had no intentions of making this a conflict for Bianca to deal with later. Wednesday finally goes and meets Eugene in his comatose state, giving him a jar of honey that she collected from his hive. Presumably, Thing has been keeping watch on his state while Wednesday was away, which may fix or break certain things regarding what other characters visit Eugene at this time, but regardless, Wednesday is still guilty about this and wonders why Eugene went alone. Yeah, we're all wondering that, aren't we, writers? Anyhow, Wednesday is also introduced to Eugene's parents, who are quite warm to Wednesday on account of her friendship with Eugene up to this point, further panging the guilt Wednesday has about putting Eugene in this circumstance, although not entirely the one to blame here. She storms off, uncomfortable knowing how much Eugene meant to her, and in turn the parents knowing Eugene felt some sort of belonging. And yeah, I don't have any qualms about this scene at all. It's in fact one of the more flawless scenes to pin down, even if the circumstance regarding Eugene's fate is going to be made extremely stupid once the major reveals are set. We cut to the morgue room where Anwar's freshly painted brain matter is being examined, with Galpin and his partner as confused as we are as to why Anwar would kill himself in this fashion, much less at all. Trying to find security footage of this event proves fruitless, as the bubblegum Thing had used to blot out the cameras in episode 4 was somehow still there a whole week after he and Wednesday had scoped out the place. So, did it not once occur to the person watching the cams that one of the cameras has been out for a whole week? Which apparently not, as even the partner says they'll look into how long this camera was blotted out. What will become even more daunting is how lucky it was for whoever killed Anwar, as, spoiler alert, he didn't kill himself, didn't bother to scrub the cameras like Wednesday did if they planned on killing Anwar. Great layup on that absolute contrivance of a murder there, Wednesday. On top of this absurdity is that Anwar had presumably left a suicide note saying that he felt guilty about supposedly faking the report that just so happens to coincide with the monster killings, as well as the one involving Garrett Gates. Now, the other question that I'm sure anyone would ask is if the handwriting on the suicide note can be attested to Anwar's handwriting, as well as if fingerprints of whatever pen Anwar wrote this note on match his, but nope. Galpin is more interested in the possibility that the Gates murder was a cover-up, as he has so desperately expressed wanting to pin Gomez on this. Now, up to this point, my opinions about Galpin as per his competent has been mostly tame, albeit with a few bumps along the road. But this sudden moxie by Galpin to take with assurance that what Anwar wrote in the suicide note true, despite Galpin already stating that Anwar was planning on his retirement, and that this whole scene smells murky given the recency bias of Anwar's suicide note, makes Galpin comfortably sit along Xavier and Wednesday as being dumb for the sake of the plot. Because let's just say for the sake of argument that Anwar did write the suicide note in earnest. That wouldn't be proof to claim Gomez was the murderer, and certainly not enough to give Galpin the ability to do what he does next. And oh boy, we'll get to that. Seeing as there would be a whole forensic investigation into the veracity of the suicide note, along with the nature of Anwar's wounds. Anyhow, we cut to Wednesday staring at the newly erected and newly melted Crackstone statue, just to remind the audience that he'll be important for something later, before she sees her mother walking to the nearby cemetery to plant a rose spitefully on Garrett Gates' grave. I say that 3 times fast. Which really doesn't tell us much of what we already know, other than that Wednesday supposes a romance Morticia and Garrett once had. Awkwardly, we pan to the quad where a family buffet is going on, and again, Wednesday chides Morticia's dishonesty, pressuring Gomez to tell her something she doesn't know. Apparently, Morticia believes Wednesday wouldn't believe them as the reason, which is frankly stupid, considering Wednesday already doesn't trust you whether you were to tell her or not, and that what is so hard to believe is hard for me to believe that anyone wouldn't believe. But whatever, you gotta pad every minute out of these hour-long shows best you can. Enid and the parents have their drama again, where her mother pines for her to wolf out above anything else, and that's the extent of that drama too, no less. Then in comes Galpin walking like he's got steel balls and arrests Gomez Addams for the same crime he presumably committed back in 1990. Now, I don't know if you know this, but there's a legal protection called double jeopardy that prevents situations like this happening, especially when the most that Galpin has to work on is Anwar's shady account of having fixed the autopsy reports. I mean, it would be one thing if a piece of evidence from that incident suddenly fell on Galpin's hands to reignite the investigation, but that would be all that would happen at this point, a second investigation into the incident, not an immediate arrest. But seeing as we've gone nearly halfway this episode and been swinging our dicks in our hands, might as well arbitrate a second act low point in this episode to get the ball rolling. Anyhow, Wednesday meets Gomez in jail. Yeah, he's already set for the occasion without a trial too, and asks him about the significance of his wife putting a rose on Garrett's headstone, which ensues a flashback scene near the beginning of the episode. Apparently, Garrett was somehow more infatuated with Morticia than Adam could be, a bit oxymoronic that Gomez would claim his infatuation turned into obsession given his proclivities, that he was willing to kill Gomez to accomplish this. Gomez gets intercepted by Garrett at the scaffolding above the quad as a fight scene ensues with some questionable choreography and trick of the eye given how Gomez rolls away in this shot, or how the sword literally flips its position to allow Gomez to grab it by the hilt and inadvertently stab Garrett with it. So, cut and dry, it was a self-defense situation, something I'm sure Morticia and Gomez should have told Wednesday all this time, and that Wednesday could have figured given the circumstances. She suspects that he might be stretching the truth from his non-verbal displays, but does console him in his adequacy as a father. Wow, that was a sudden 180 on what was barely 5 minutes of Wednesday waxing stale about how horrible her parents are. Kinda makes me think this drama was completely manufactured whole cloth. Wednesday confronts Galpin about proving his father's innocence, getting Galpin to state that not only did her father sign the confession, don't think that's how proof of guilt works, Galpin, but by the means of which he used to murder Garrett. Wednesday finally apes a sentiment that the audience would agree on regarding the timing of Anwar's suicide relating to this murder in tandem to when Gomez returned to Jericho. And of course, Galpin isn't having any of it because I guess he's so General Huck's arrogant as to literally overstep his duty as a sheriff to do so. Furthermore, Wednesday also suspects that this investigation was a means to derail hers, curious as to whether Galpin followed up on the DNA evidence she provided him. Galpin and Wednesday exchange some dialogue that goes,
DNA results. No match, inconclusive.
So you truly believe this is all some coincidence? Whoever hurt Eugene also murdered the coroner.
Unfortunately, someone sabotaged the security camera in the morgue, so we don't know what happened. They stuck bubblegum on the lens. Black bubblegum. Maybe I should run DNA on that.
Now, there are several glaring issues with what has been established in these few words. First off, yes, it does make sense that the bloody rag and the chipped fang wouldn't match for reasons we can get into when we figure out who the chipped fang belongs to, but anything as to whether the DNA results showed who the evidence belonged to is left up into the air, getting me to speculate some duplicity on Galpin's part as to why he would withhold that information. But considering that he threatened Wednesday to check the DNA on the bubblegum means that we can't excuse this lack of information as being limited by the technology of my time, as Galpin likely knows that Wednesday was behind sabotaging the cameras in the morgue. Secondly, Wednesday accidentally spills something she couldn't possibly know of until later regarding her belief that the attempted murder of Eugene is somehow related to Anwar's suicide. Of course, you could try to reason this as Wednesday does know the monster can turn human, but given the monster's proclivity up to this point is to tear every victim a new one, this doesn't follow. Going back to the DNA evidence, if Galpin can attest Wednesday's likely culpability on the bubblegum planted on the cameras, wouldn't that get Galpin curious about Xavier regarding the bloody rag? Or even more so regarding the chipped fang? Again, we can try to spin this as Galpin is more annoyed by Wednesday, or that he only got a result of whether they matched and not who the evidence belonged to, but the latter has already been debunked by what Galpin says to Wednesday, and the former means that for as much as Galpin has tried to pin these monster killings on someone involved in Nevermore, doesn't care to follow up on the lead regarding the fang. Thirdly, and this sort of eluded me given how much bullshit has been pounding my head regarding the show, but do you mean to tell me that after Wednesday and things searched the morgue, they just neglected to take the bubblegum with them? Because remember, the writers told us how fucking smart Wednesday is, that it would behoove of her to do this so as not to incriminate herself when and if a situation like this arrives. After that waffling, Galpin mentions to Wednesday that the Gates' family have all but thinned out in a variety of ways, but most importantly is that Garrett's sister presumably drowned at sea after being orphaned. Considering how direct the fates of the mother and father were and how vague the fate of the little sister is, means that Galpin is only partially correct. The reason for Galpin even mentioning this was that as a result of Gomez's stunt, that he effectively wiped out the family in turn, even if unintentional. A bit curious then how Gomez describes the family to Wednesday as being rich and powerful only to fade out in a whimper because of this setback. But I don't think the writers talked to one another between the things they established within the same episode. Seeing as the Nevermore goings-on are still ongoing, we pan back to Enid and her parents yet again to drive home the drama of Enid wolfing out, although curiously her mother suggests brochures to lycanthropy conversion camp to help her with that, and Enid is quite upset about this and storms off. Considering the only conceit Enid has about herself that the writers establish is her own ability to wolf out, why Enid would be upset about this is beyond me. It's almost like Enid and Wednesday are having their own parallels, given that Wednesday was unusually upset about Gomez having killed someone when she absolutely wouldn't care, and Enid the same regarding her lycanthropy. As for lore implications, the propensity for werewolves to exist in this world such that lycanthropy conversion sessions are prevalent as far as the Balkans further drives the nonsense home. Like, do the writers understand why the masquerade was important for the world not to immediately fall apart if vampires were not only plentiful and well known but also treated as a formality? Wednesday and Pugsley share the only scene they've had with each other, I don't count what happened at the beginning of episode 1 as one, in which they tried to have a moment while they used live hand grenades as fish bait. It's not really much to chew my teeth on, but basically Wednesday reassures Pugsley that his father is innocent in spite of him having signed the confession, which also apparently means you don't get a trial either. Through this, Wednesday goes peeping about her mother again, who happens to be in the inner sanctum. Remember when the nightshades were relevant? Wanting to be left alone. Morticia assumes Wednesday joined the nightshades, although considering the ease of which to enter this sanctum would make anyone a nightshade, but Wednesday denies such, stating that
I'll never live up to your legacy here. So why try? I won the Poe Cup, you claimed it 4 times. I joined the fencing team, you captained it. Why would you send me somewhere where I could only ever exist in your shadow?
So, with all the cuntiness of Wednesday Addams aside, are the writers trying to tell me that everything Wednesday did that was completely out of character was in character because she was trying to live up to their expectations? Because I assumed the writer's incompetence about how Wednesday didn't want to be molded into a version of her parents, yet at every turn do so as more the writers prioritizing Wednesday a girl boss than anything. But now I'm being told that she was trying to prove herself to them? Talk about flipping a switch on her dynamic with her parents. This is straight up ditching that caveat and exchanging another out of pocket for the sake of this episode, as this will be the last episode that will ever lampshade that strained relationship in this season. Anyhow, Morticia exclaims that the Nightshades were founded on protecting outcasts from persecution, and was presumably founded by a late ancestor of Gomez's side, prompting Wednesday to exclaim that it was Goody Addams. Now, assuming what Weems said at the Poe Cup to be true, would make it so Goody couldn't possibly have formed a group for a school that wasn't founded until roughly 250 plus years after she supposedly arrived in America. But nope, apparently Wednesday's guess is correct and not dumb, making what Morticia said now dumber, given that means Goody must have had some Jimmy Carter blood running in her to accomplish such a task. Well, I suppose the circumstance involving the Nightshades hasn't mattered much really, so in Wednesday asks Morticia what really happened in 1990, assuming Gomez didn't actually kill Garrett. Again, she's correct, and Morticia recontextualizes the same flashback we've seen twice over. The only change in context is that Morticia was up the quad's balcony along with Garrett and Gomez, and that Morticia grabbed the sword and inadvertently punched it into Garrett as he approached her. The most peculiar thing about this flashback is that, for some odd reason, Gomez decided to take the blame for the kill by grabbing the sword from her and walking towards the balcony to incriminate himself to the young Weems. Now, character-wise, it absolutely would make sense why Gomez would take the fall for this, but regarding the headache it causes the Addams, wouldn't. As I've already stated, in either scenario, both could have claimed it was an act of self-defense, as Gomez clearly has the wounds to prove it, but that would be doubly so for Morticia, not just because she's a woman, but because of what Gomez said about how obsessive Garrett was for her to the point of trying to call the police for help. I mean, given that Gomez was released with no charges means that Morticia equally would have had the same circumstance as him. So, if anything, this was made purposefully up to so that Wednesday, 30 some odd years later, would be made relevant to this by way of Anwar's sketchy suicide. Even more pondering this confession is that Wednesday believes that Garrett's outburst was more supernatural rather than out of passion, even though Wednesday still doesn't trust Morticia entirely, and that Wednesday herself can't paint a vivid picture of what Morticia witnessed all those years ago. And given that memories like that sort of get embellished as the years wore on, how can Wednesday assume that Morticia is exaggerating or leaving out certain details? Regardless, this nonsense allows Morticia and Wednesday to go grave digging to find any proof regarding Gates' behavior. Unfortunately, Sheriff's partner, Santiago, yes, you literally only know her name by subtitles up to this point, catches them in on the act and puts them in the clink. The parents get comfortable with each other as Wednesday has the means of which to escape and or prove their collective innocence, although you absolutely would still be fine for grave robbing regardless of your intentions. Supposedly, the finger shows proof that Garrett was dying of nightshade poisoning before Morticia got him the rest of the way, which, Wednesday, that wouldn't prove either of their innocence. It'd be like saying that COVID killed a dude who was shot in the head. Oh wait, that has happened! Maybe this is more realistic than I let on! As Wednesday pries back the finger, she yet again gets a flashback vision, conveniently not at any time she was digging up the finger or showed it to them, where the context for how Garrett was poisoned made in place. Supposedly, his father wanted him to spike the Raven Dance's punch bowl, but Garrett got too passionate to kill Gomez personally, and the fight they had causes the canister to break inside of Garrett's vest. Of course, how any of this will help Wednesday, as this would literally only be her account, and her account alone is baffling to me, on top of Garrett's supposed infatuation with Morticia coming at odds with his father's wishes even more so. Given that the scaffolding at the quad isn't around anymore, or any trace of evidence of this broken canister either, means that even if Wednesday was taken at her word, she doesn't have any concrete proof. So I'm sure you're wondering just how the Addamses get themselves out of this mess. So Morticia and Wednesday go to the mayor's office and present him with Garrett's finger, proving that his death was more so to do with nightshade poisoning. More damning than that was that Wednesday accuses Mayor of covering this up back when he was a sheriff, on top of supposedly instructing Dr. Anwar to falsify the report to keep the peace between Nevermore and Jericho in order to slot himself as mayor. So, let's break this all down. First off, regardless if Garrett was under the effects of some poison doesn't save Gomez or Morticia a potential murder charge, because the stabbing is what did him in. It would be one thing if he had already killed over and the sword happenstance fell into him, which again, the editing doesn't justify him supposedly dying in a flash this way. Secondly, if what Wednesday is claiming about the mayor and Dr. Anwar to be true, does that mean that the suicide note was in fact legit, and or that the killer somehow knew that Anwar had falsified the report, but not in the way that they had thought? Oh, won't we get into that when we find out who killed Anwar? Because boy howdy does that mean that whatever the killer's intentions to derail the monster killing investigation and to destroy the Addams' reputation caused the exact opposite to happen. Thirdly, if the mayor was supposedly fixing this whole incident to not cause a stir, is that why Gomez also got off with no charges? Because I feel not having a trial would be more detrimental to Jericho and or Nevermore than if there was one, given that whether or not Gomez did kill the son of a bitch, Garrett nevertheless broke into Nevermore as a non-attendee. Not to mention, if Gomez hadn't signed the confession note, means that the mayor would have had the exact thing he wanted to avoid happen, and only because Gomez inexplicably took the blame did he do so. So yeah, a lot of this interrogation and negotiation work completely fall apart if we don't account for any of this. So, Wednesday and Morticia bargain their innocence and Gomez's release in exchange for the mayor's perceived reputation maintained, which of course he obliges, regardless of all the objections I raised before. Morticia and Wednesday talk about her recent visions, which is the first time in this show that we're even given an idea as to how those visions work, considering their superfluous nature. Apparently the visions will have a recollection of an ancestor who'll reach out to them when the moment arises, with Goody Addams as Wednesday's protege. But given Wednesday's willingness to tell Morticia about any of this, I think it's safe to say that whatever useless drama Wednesday had between her parents is effectively over, far beyond when we could even fathom why she loathed them in the first place. Anyhow, Galpin has to apologize to Gomez, which gets the two to discuss about their kids having found a bond between them before Gomez gets reunited with the rest of his family. This effectively ends the family gathering section of this, but not before Enid stamps down on her mother's insistence on her going to summer camp, wanting her lycanthropy to come naturally. Interestingly, the father, who has been mostly silent up to this point, finally pipes up to say how proud he is of her for standing up to her mother, because apparently he couldn't pose any objections to his wife himself. Well, regardless, it was basically didn't go anywhere, just like with Bianca and Gabrielle settling their deal regarding Morning Song until season 2, assuming anyone can even remember what that settled deal was. The Addams once again are ready to leave Wednesday to her own devices, interestingly without taking Finn with them along, both because he didn't do what he was told, but also as symbolism for their trust in her. But remember, it wouldn't be an Addams Family adjacent show without them, would it? Morticia gives Wednesday the yearbook Weems let her borrow, but not to Weems herself for some reason, unless the yearbook Morticia gave Wednesday was her own. But regardless, her doing that gives Wednesday a clue regarding how gaslit she was about Rowan's fate. As she storms in, Weems' office to confront her about having impersonated Rowan. She knows this by using the yearbook photo of Weems, who had perfectly imitated Julie Garland, to prove this, instead of, I don't know, the likely phone calls of Rowan's family, or even that Rowan's family themselves having arrived at this family gathering to confront Weems on the matter, but that's neither here nor there. Like with the mayor, Wednesday threatens to tell Galpin about Weems' cover-up, which gets Weems to fess up a lot about how and why she did it, even saying that Rowan's father was supposedly a-okay with Rowan being killed this way, and for Weems to cover it up just because it would keep the integrity of the school afloat. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think any father, even one who doesn't value his son that way, would take that line down just to support Weems' own ends. Some clamoring can be heard outside of the office, getting Weems and Wednesday to investigate. There's a burning on the lawn that reads, "Fire will rain," which is about as veiled a threat as burning a lowercase t on someone's lawn. If you think I sincerely believe that isn't, it's a South Park joke. And that effectively ends this episode. And if you notice at the end credits, Tim Burton isn't credited as such for this episode, which may explain a lot of the nonsense regarding the legal proceedings of this episode, how disjointed the other subplots involving Bianca and Enid were, and how no culpability for not only Wednesday, but for Weems and the mayor are being indicted upon. I didn't get an opportunity to talk about how complicated it would have been for Weems to go about covering up Rowan's murder just to keep the reputation of the school, when had it been made public likely wouldn't have, or how Anwar's suicide will literally become a loose end as the plot unfolds, or other smaller inconsistencies regarding this episode in question. But unfortunately, the farther we get into the show, the more bullshit gets piled on as a result. So I have to deal with the biggest blunders first and foremost before I can tackle the rest. And with that, we go to episode 6. We start episode 6 with Wednesday attempting to perform a seance to reach out to Goody in order to control her psychic ability, following up from what her mother said about her specific nature. Enid interrupts this, ominously too somehow, just to get an idea of what she's up to. They chat a bit until a ransom note is flung under their door. Apparently their door also just somehow closed itself between shots, suggesting that Wednesday may find her answers at Crackstone Crypt. Now, if you remember in episode 2, Crackstone Crypt was the rally point for the Poe Cup, and we got a brief look at its placement in episode 3. I've updated the map of a good guess as to the locations of certain notable places, including that Crackstone Crypt must be on an island if the contestants had to paddle there by boat. This may be inconsequential, but this detail will get largely ignored for this episode and future, and I can't simply excuse this by saying, well, they must have got a boat and paddled there off screen. Anyhow, Enid and Wednesday make it to Crackstone Crypt as Wednesday peers in while Enid opts to stay out. Poking in the crypt itself proves to be fruitless, as not only is the crypt empty, but the note and Enid arriving was just all a ploy to throw a surprise birthday for Wednesday. Now, let's look at all the faces who borrowed to do this, starting with Xavier. Considering that up to episode 4 they haven't been on speaking terms is a bit mind-boggling that he would care to do this. Ajax and Wednesday have had little to no dialogue between them. The Siren dude who tried to sabotage Enid and Wednesday's boat is also here, and then 2 other no-name people are here as well. Normally, I can try to chalk this up to, oh, they were just being considerate, but I think this show is sincerely trying to gaslit me and the audience into believing Wednesday had such chemistry with any of these characters, much less good relations with these people, that they would go out of their way to plan such an event. Now, of course, Thing was the one who planned such a thing. Interesting how much he gets his hands onto the plot off-screen, pun intended. And maybe he could have spurred Enid on to help, but whether or not any of these people would put up with doing this given their disposition towards Wednesday is another huge ask the show insists upon me. Trying to get into the festivities has Wednesday distracted by some Latin inscription on the wall, noting that the first few lines are the same as the fire effigy we left off on episode 5. And shit, if you somehow had the memory of a goldfish, even the show reminds you of that too, because that's how much confidence this show sincerely has for your own intelligence and lack thereof. Anyhow, Wednesday touches the inscription hoping to get a vision instinctually, and she does, once more transposing her to the past like in episode 3. For the first time in this vision, Wednesday manages to have a conversation with Goody regarding her means to use her ability. Before Goody says some poetic sophistry before pointing her to this house as something she must seek. Again, the visions are mainly used to help Wednesday along the way of her investigation, as any actual deduction and reasoning is just too hard for the writers to crop up themselves. On top of the riddles, Goody warns Wednesday of what the Path of the Raven beholds for her, sniting Wednesday to suggest the Path of Loneliness is a familiar one for her. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. You knew I'd bring that back. To the apex of this episode, at least I think from memory of watching this, considering these last 3 episodes start to blur in my mind. So in episode 6 properly starts, although starts with the show might as well be jump-starting roadkill of a taser, considering episode 6 is very much like episode 3 in its filler material. Like with adorning Wednesday with a variety of presents, like a taxidermy kit of her own, and a snood by Enid, because I guess Enid really just finds the red in that black pitch of an abyss of Wednesday calls a heart in there. Basically, this scene goes nowhere. Mayor Walker and Weems have a discussion about Lucas and his antics back in episode 4, prompting Weems to assume he was also responsible for the lawn fire before Walker states that he's been grounded for the last week. Last week between episode 4 and 5, mind you, unless yet another week had rolled by between episode 5 and 6. Anyhow, in contrast to their amicability in episode 3, they are much more frustrated with each other, as Mayor himself assumes Nevermore likely responsible for the monster killings after what happened to Eugene, which is a bit weird considering Weems covered up Rowan's murder for both their sake, meaning it wouldn't make sense for Eugene's attack to be on Nevermore's hands, or for the mayor to come to that conclusion if they have this working relationship of keeping their own integrities intact. Back at the long effigy, Xavier and Wednesday finally talk to one another after what has been effectively a week since, although talking to Wednesday proves cold as both Wednesday still believes Xavier is the monster, despite what Galpin told her about the DNA authorization, and how Xavier himself made it perfectly clear to her how upset he was. Supposedly Xavier wants to help Wednesday with something, which I'm not sure if he's talking about in regards to her investigation or just personally, but we'll just have to save that nugget for later. Inside Nevermore, Lucas is out wiping some of the windows as per his community service his father put him through after his stunt. Bianca walks up to him and notices a strange bracelet on his arm, prompting him to talk about the morning song thing that Gabrielle wanted Bianca roped up into again. The bracelet is a means to indicate his membership and desire to fix his act, which is why Bianca was curious and also expresses that he should distance himself from morning song as quick as possible. Lucas asks how she knows, and she dodges the question, suggesting that he should listen to her knowing how he sabotaged that dance for her. I can only suppose all this was to foreshadow a possible relationship between him and Bianca, as opposed to her and Xavier, but this is another loose thread that may or may not get redressed in Season 2. I should also mention that this is the last time that Lucas will have any bearing or even mention in this show, as though his brief inclusion in Episode 1 was course corrected in future episodes in spite of how little of a dynamic he has going for her. We get another really awkward close-up shot of Wednesday as she reminisces on birthdays and the meaning of life behind them, with a few collages of her younger self enjoying the morbid festivities to an unconscious Eugene. The monologue gets cut short by Kimbot with a bouquet of flowers to adorn the room. Now, you won't believe me if I were to tell you, but these fucking flowers will become another red herring towards Kimbot as a suspect as well. And how? Well, the hint has something to do with the house in Wednesday's vision. As for the dialogue, Wednesday catches up on Kimbot as to what happened in episode 5, as though the audience got lobotomized up to this point, or that Kimbot couldn't have figured that given what Wednesday said during their last session. But most of it is Kimbot again psychoanalyzing Wednesday regarding what she likely overheard of Wednesday's monologue. In Mayor's office, his secretary gives him a death certificate regarding the late Laurel Gates, as well as him prodding about some phenomenon regarding the Gates' estate lights blaring up. Laurel, if you weren't aware, was the little sister that had presumably drowned at sea following the deaths of her parents. In episode 5, there was a brief scene where the mayor had brought up the Gates' family photo as it struck his curiosity regarding all that nonsense about the Addams' culpability, which is why he's even looking at this and wondering about that old estate as well. This will all tie in to what Goody pointed Wednesday to, as well as the connection regarding Crackstone, but again, these connections are as airtight as a toothpick foundation. At the weather vane, Wednesday is catching up on her reading. I should mention how that book Rowan took has become completely irrelevant to everything, before Tyler gives her a cup in his own way of celebrating her birthday. It's weird considering that this is also the first time Tyler and Wednesday have talked to each other since episode 4, as a parallel to Xavier, although for completely different reasons, mind you, but still, I wonder if that was done purposefully. According to Wednesday, Thing had made it almost everyone's business to know that it was her birthday today. Also a bit of a contrivance that her birthday was a few weeks shy of her going to Nevermore 2, as Tyler interjects stating that he delivered the cake for her. Interesting that he would say that, given Xavier also said he designed that cake, so they must have got over their differences off screen, or that either or is trying to take credit for making it. And of course, it wouldn't be unlike Wednesday to boast, as she normally does, saying that every day is about me, and that it being her birthday just comes with some extra flair. Really just makes you want to root for the main protagonist now, doesn't it? Tyler awkwardly prompts a proper date with Wednesday, only for her to shoot him down again on account of her ongoing investigation. She gets him in on the know regarding her update on it, showing him the sketch of the gates to the Gates' estate that Tyler can't communicate or extrapolate what her slate states. 8. Although, with how this plot will unfold, there might be some hesitation in Tyler to actually tell her what her drawing conveys, considering he changes the subject to her ghosting him and wondering if he did something wrong. Wednesday doesn't answer, and as far as I'm aware, there isn't an answer other than bullshit for the sake of the plot distracted me, so in comes Sheriff Galpin to hopefully get this Sisyphean ball rolling. She mentions to him about how the veiled threat at Nevermore was also an inscription to the Crackstone Crypt as a connection, but Galpin proves unhelpful as he's let that old story lie, as well as how Wednesday also doesn't have a perpetrator to forward their actions towards. Back at Xavier's shed, Wednesday bumps in, and while normally I'd complain about how Xavier's shed has been left open yet again, he wouldn't lock it while he was also in it working on his craft. Considering that Tyler couldn't figure out the sketch, she needs Xavier's help in pointing her the right direction. Of course, as Xavier has been haunted by dreams of the monster, he has a sketch of himself of those same gates that he drew a few days ago. This particular detail of how recent he had these dreams about those gates will be important to a lot of the show's continual gaslighting of him as a prime suspect, as well as further destroying this plot from the inside out once we do figure out who the prime suspects really are. Xavier tells her that it's the old Gates mansion that he frequents on his jogging sessions, before Thing directs their attention to a piece that Xavier worked in secret. Now, of course, while I did say that past episode 6, there wouldn't be a major school flavor, but given the heavy-handedness of the birthday theming so far, this might as well be the school birthday episode. Apparently, he made this piece because he still couldn't get Wednesday out of his head, and even animates the drawing to play the cello notes that he hears her play himself. Now, if that isn't simpery, then I don't know what is. Back at the weather vane, this is getting tiring to say so many times, Bianca and Taylor share some dialogue that goes as well as you'd expect, as Tyler just wants Bianca to give Wednesday the snood she left behind that Enid gave her. Bianca, of course, is here because of what she told Lucas, not expecting him to come. Lucas didn't think so either, and in they have a chat. Lucas followed through with her advice and rid himself of the bracelets, although still curious why Bianca would give him a chance given his reputation. Bianca wanted to confide in him, believing that he shares some semblance regarding how they've been told by others that they can never change who they are. Bianca regarding her siren powers, and Lucas regarding his feeling of emptiness and meaning. As touching as it is, if there was more to comb over on these two characters rather than being completely sidelined for a potential season 2, then I'd highly praise this part of the episode, but alas, it goes nowhere. Wednesday discovers the old Gates' mansion and attempts to peer into it, until spotting that someone else has already scoped out the place. In comes Mayor Walker, who walks back to his car and calls the sheriff to tell him that he has supposedly figured out who is likely behind the monster killings. Of course, he doesn't tell the sheriff explicitly who, in spite of the fact that would be something you would definitely state, because you need to keep the audience guessing, and that he won't be able to as a result of what will happen to him next. thing distracts the mayor's attention so Wednesday can smuggle herself in the back of his SUV to see where he's headed next, which would be only of one of two locations past this point. Also, apparently he just left his trunk unlocked for Wednesday to allot herself doing this in the first place, but that's besides the point. Now, the drive sequence between him going to the mansion and heading back to the weather vane panned from late afternoon to the nighttime, making me wonder just how far this mansion was to Jericho and the rest of the goings on. Especially curious as to how Wednesday herself got to this mansion if it was that far, as well as just how long Xavier's jogging sessions are for him to come across this regularly. But, as I said, the spatial presence of things are made completely irrelevant throughout. Walker parks and starts to walk over to the weather vane where Sheriff Galpin is awaiting him with the good news, only to be unfortunately ran over by an oncoming car. Now, the sheer multitude of factors in play for the sequence to happen is staggering if you don't know who the driver is in this scenario, but given that I do, means this circumstance could not have happened at any point. But let's break down why. So, Mayor Walker declined to mention who he thinks is behind the monster killings of Galpin, meaning that had he did, Galpin could have pinned who ran over the mayor as that very suspect. Secondly, the person who ran over Walker just so happened to know that Walker and Galpin were planning to meet in this circumstance at this time, managed to run over him with no one noticing who was behind the wheel, and somehow doing so with no damage to the car itself. And if that wasn't already coincidental enough, Wednesday happened to have come across Mayor scoping out the house at the same time she did in order for her to dump herself in his car to see any of this happen, but not notice the same things anyone would have noticed in an incident such as that. Or, let's go into the smaller things, like how Walker chose a parking spot that was a few meters away from the weather vane, so he had to cross the street to be ran over, choosing to set this meeting at night to deliberately limit the visibility of the stuntman driving the car, and your suspension of disbelief, deciding not to text Sheriff what he knows as opposed to calling him, or doing both for that matter, Sheriff not opting to wait for the mayor to arrive outside, or for both the mayor and Sheriff to arrange a less discreet place than the fucking weather vane to disclose this information. Anyhow, Galpin wants Wednesday's statement, curious why she was in the back of his SUV when this all happened. She tells him that he saw him at the Gates' mansion and had scoped it out for her own reasons, and apparently what Walker left for Galpin wasn't a call but a fucking voicemail, meaning there would be even more precedence for him to state who he believed was behind the monster killings. And supposedly, when Walker had come across a wild discovery on a cold case, he had a tradition of discussing it over pie at the weather vane to figure it out. So, the contrived reason to disclose his powder keg of a discovery in a very, very public place was founded on a cliche as well? Color me surprised that bullshit happens to allow more bullshit to happen. Regardless, Wednesday believes that the Gates family has something to do with interrupting this discovery Mayor made and hands Galpin back Mayor's phone. At Nevermore, Weems once again gives Wednesday a stern talking to, wondering how she got herself mixed up with the mayor's assault. She says something that I think can describe a lot of how the major plot beats in this show unfolds, such that I just want to use this as a clip dump to explain the writer's thought process through making it. Anyhow, because of this, Weems puts the school on full lockdown and revokes Wednesday's off-campus privileges. Now, I get why Weems would be upset for the mayor being injured this way, but why is she blaming Wednesday for this? I mean, it could be that she was off curfew when this happened, which is why she's getting punished this way, but if the whole school is on lockdown because of this, doesn't follow of her personally scolding Wednesday for her actions. And let's also keep that whole school lockdown and relinquishing of off-campus privileges in note, considering the constant negligence, irresponsibility, and lack of security involving Nevermore thus far has proven that this school could barely keep some troublemakers from driving at the front door, much less corral all its students to stay within its campus borders, means that what Weems is saying feels like blowing hot air. Now, as much as I condemn Nevermore for such negligence, I wish it did uphold this rule Weems puts in place, as it will become largely ignored for the better part of the next few episodes, making it meaningless to establish it as a consequence for Wednesday if they wouldn't bother. Anyhow, while Wednesday is typing up her novel, Thornhill returns to see what's up with her. The novel Wednesday's writing just so happens to coincide with what she's currently doing, as Thornhill gives her a gift of her own in the form of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is about as placid a gift as giving someone a Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Anyhow, this devolves into Wednesday suspecting that Weems put Thornhill up to this, regarding some quotes from the book in tandem with Wednesday's own feelings towards Weems' motives, getting her to shoot the brief friendship she had with Thornhill down. This will be quite consequential for Wednesday going on, but that is also assuming that Thornhill's intentions were always pure from the start. Next day, Wednesday calls up Tyler using Nevermore's payphone. Apparently they just have these as opposed to like cell phones, following up his interest in a non-birthday dinner. But as will be established, Wednesday will use this as an opportunity to flake on the campus restriction in order to investigate the Gates mansion further. And we'll get to that too in a moment. After Wednesday hangs up, Tyler and Galpin have another discussion. Galpin trying to sway Tyler away from Wednesday, while Tyler himself brings up his mom again as kryptonite to Galpin's sternness. Galpin tries to ignore that wound by going to the hospital to inspect the mayor before Tyler prompts a harsh question that gives an equally morose answer. Further, aching my curiosity as to the dynamic of these two, but constantly hushed away in every scene they interact. Still at Ophelia Hall, it's nearly time for Wednesday to plan her escape, but not before she somehow ropes Enid in as well, getting her to pretend to wolf out in order to have Wednesday pretend to restrain her as an excuse to leave the campus grounds. Now, I know that Wednesday does this by stating that she has some regrets about her less than favorable response to the surprise birthday, but what I don't understand is why she needs to have Enid come with her? What does Enid accomplish, much less help, in what Wednesday is planning? But unfortunately, what Wednesday intends is not what the writers are trying to set up, as clunkily as they can in this scene. Once Wednesday and Enid go into Tyler's car, the plan Wednesday had should at this point be made immediately apparent to the both of them that they weren't planning on whatever Wednesday told them. How does Wednesday bullshit herself out of this? She just literally says,
"Looks like there's been a change of plans."
And the two of them just roll with it. Yeah, I don't think Wednesday is as smart as the writers tell me she is, but given the absolute lemmings that are going along with this, as Seat noted, I guess she is, relatively speaking. Now, I should mention it before how contrived it was for Enid to be strung along for what would be an investigation, but there might be a two-pronged reason beyond what was foreshadowed at the beginning of this episode that we can get into once the major reveals are all laid. But knowing what I know, it makes Wednesday's
Incredible luck
even more baffling than before. As Wednesday and the gang stroll off, Xavier also came up to Ophelia Hall wondering where Wednesday was at, trying to apologize. First off, again, I guess the whole no boys rule just isn't regularly enforced. Secondly, how weird it is for Xavier to barge in a place he knows he's not supposed to be in. And thirdly, how Xavier being here while Thing was doing his own thing will also be made incredibly contrived considering the timing of it all. Scooby and the gang arrive at the Gates mansion as Wednesday spills out her true intentions to Enid and Tyler, who both recognize her chicanery but regardless still go along with it. I guess because they've allowed it this far, might as well keep that boat rockin'. The gang make it into the garage where Wednesday finds the car that hit the mayor, prompting Enid to call up Galpin to forward this. Smart move, but of course Wednesday shuts down that option as doing so would wound up getting Wednesday expelled as per her off-campus restriction. Also smart move on Wednesday, and it's just nice to see some character-specific intellect shine through, as well as giving a more cohesive reason why characters aren't necessarily doing the smartest thing. As they poke around in more of the house, Wednesday comes across the Gates' family picture while monologuing about why Goody would send her here if the family is long gone. Yeah, I'm sure there was a perfectly sound reason for why Goody gave Wednesday such a cryptic lead on her murder mystery, instead of just blurting out the connection as anyone should. Regardless, Wednesday finds a cliche suspicious bookcase, and inside a altar commemorating Crackstone with more edicts scrawled on the walls. Wednesday also notices that the candles in said altar are still warm, getting Wednesday to expect the gang are not alone. She has Tyler go downstairs while she and Enid stay up, and boy, if it was any other combo Wednesday chose, would drastically change the circumstances of the next scene, now wouldn't it? As Wednesday and Enid go upstairs, the cliche compounds itself as Wednesday wants the two to split up to search around, prompting Enid to even address that. Wednesday assures her that if they finish looking around faster that they can leave sooner, so I guess I'll give this cliche a pass here even in spite of what Wednesday said about the candles earlier. Enid points Wednesday to something of interest, and inside is a room that has been tidied up in comparison to the rest of the house. Of note is a bouquet of flowers that seem purposefully similar to the ones that Kimbot put in Eugene's room, and some kind of box with the engraving LG on it. Before the two can investigate further, some clamor can be heard elsewhere which gets the two to dart off, but not before Wednesday can pilfer that box. Downstairs, Tyler screams that "It's here!" before presumably getting attacked by the monster, prompting the two to use the dumbwaiter as they escape from it climbing upstairs. The rope from the dumbwaiter flays through as Enid and Wednesday crash down to the lowermost floor of the mansion. What Wednesday discovers from this before the monster chases them down here is that this is the room where the missing body parts from the other victims are being contained, as well as where this experiment for the monster/killer is being conducted. Now, since they got out from that basement, where we last saw the monster, it's prime time to leave, but Wednesday needs to ensure Tyler's safety in spite of it. We find Tyler injured around the garageway entrance, which is quite the impeccable timing for him given what I actually know. But you know what's even more impeccable? Xavier shows up yet again at the precise moment that Wednesday is treating to Tyler's wounds, just as the monster has presumably been done with its rampage. Now, let's just go into the layers upon layers of the
Incredible luck.
needed for this to happen. First off, this show has already established that not only is this house quite far away, but that you need to drive there to reach it easily. This is contradicted, of course, by Wednesday and Xavier having come across it on foot, but the precedent has already been set with Mayor Walker and Wednesday needing a drive there by Tyler. As for the drive itself, the school has been on lockdown and Wednesday was able to contrive a reason to leave, but for Xavier, who the fuck knows how he was able to walk off the school grounds so easily? But seeing as he was able to barge in the backside of Ophelia Hall and force Thane to tell him where they went, that means that if Xavier had chosen any other time or day to apologize to Wednesday about this, wouldn't put him once again on Wednesday's suspicions about him. And furthermore, Xavier just so happens to show up exactly when Tyler was injured and right after Wednesday and Enid had escaped from the monster, as had he shown up earlier or later would inexorably change the circumstances leading into episodes 7 and 8. And it's funny to think how desperate the writers want you to think Xavier is a monster when they didn't even need to do that in this circumstance given what I know. At the Galpin house, Wednesday is out trying to patch up Tyler's wounds as the gang sit around cautiously before Sheriff himself barges in wondering what the commotion is. In spite of Wednesday's prior rejections about letting the sheriff in on this at the risk of expulsion, Wednesday insists he needs to see what she saw at the Gates' mansion. And what they find is that the entire house, basement to bedroom, is completely cleaned out. Now, this show again doesn't make a good habit of showing the time between scenes, but considering it's still nighttime, I highly doubt that one person, and yes, it is one person, could have cleaned up their incriminating evidence, especially with the way the monster had gone and messed up the place too, in the time it took Wednesday and the gang to patch up Tyler at his house and to go back to the mansion, especially doing so without even leaving a crumb of it behind. And as for that crumb, hey Wednesday, how about you show that fucking box you snatched earlier to Sheriff, why don't ya? Galpin has headed up to here with Wednesday's moxie on this and forbids her seeing his son and continuing this investigation. Twisting the knife in this, Weems also makes sure to remind her of how fucked she is given her violations and of endangering her friends in the process. Only until now does Wednesday even show Weems the page regarding Rowan's warning as a way to bargain Weems' own desire to save Nevermore from harm as to give Wednesday one more chance. And she does, albeit quite reluctantly, and it gets me to wonder if had Wednesday shown Weems this at any other point in the show, that her disposition towards Wednesday would have been less contrived, to say the least. Now, as I said in the last parts, there is only one major instance of Wednesday finally being called out for her bullshit when it should have been done so much earlier, and this episode is it. Enid is also fed up with her and states that
I've tried really, really, really hard to be your friend. Always put myself out there, thought of your feelings, Told people, I know she gives off serial killer vibes, but she's really just shy.
I never asked you to do that.
You didn't have to, because that's what friends do. They don't have to be asked. And the fact that you don't know that says everything.
And, as much as I've relished for a moment like this, let's remind ourselves that at no point did Wednesday need to bring Anita along for the ride, as she was largely unhelpful, save for busting the door open and finding that curious bedroom. Of course, and he does regard that as a character flaw of Wednesday's regarding her obsession with this investigation, but ultimately, Wednesday stringing Anita along was only in service to square the circle of what Goody warned her about being alone. The only thing Wednesday can console in is the box she grabbed, and as she picks it up, she accidentally triggers a secret compartment in it that shows various pictures of her taken, some likely, some quite unlikely. Nevertheless, this means that whoever has been taking part in these murders has also been keeping tabs on Wednesday. As Wednesday monologues, we see that someone has pulled the plug on the mayor, getting me to wonder if a certain other character should have their plug to be pulled as well, given what they were likely witness to. And that was the end of episode 6 and the end of part 3. And it baffles me still how a 8-episode season can find it in itself to have 2 filler episodes, even if episode 6 has a lot of major advancements of the unraveling of this murder mystery too. But a lot of that was trying to make the foreshadowing at the beginning of this episode coincide with Wednesday's untimely birthday in the midst of all of this, while characters are continually omnipresent when convenient or killed when convenient to the plot. And if you thought it couldn't get any worse, just wait and see for the final part.